Welcome to the debate. Have you ever spent, I don't know, hundreds of hours just staring at a grammar textbook, perfectly memorizing conjugation tables, only to completely freeze up the moment a native speaker actually asks you for directions on the street?
Oh, yeah. It is a universally humbling experience.
Right?
You have all the vocabulary locked in your head, but when the actual moment arrives, it's like your brain just, unplugs entirely.
Exactly. And that very frustration sits at the absolute center of the mechanics of language acquisition and really the psychology of habit formation. We are constantly debating this central question. Should we lower the barrier to entry, essentially greasing the gears of the mind to make language practice feel, quote-unquote, effortless? Or does true fluency require a level of deliberate, structured rigor that you simply cannot bypass with easy micro-habits?
It really gets to the core of how humans learn anything complex, doesn't it? Are we smoothing the path so much to keep people motivated that we actually, remove the journey itself?
Yeah, and that tension is what brings us to today's source material. It's a really fascinating guide titled The Blueprint for Effortless English Fluency.
It's definitely a bold title.
Very bold. The central claim here is that the secret to rapid language improvement isn't innate talent, and it certainly isn't locking yourself in a room for 10 hours a day to study syntax.
Thank goodness for that.
Right? Rather, the text argues that true fluency is achieved by integrating small, natural habits into your daily life to the point where learning becomes almost invisible. So I'll state my position right up front. I argue that lowering the friction of learning through ultra-short daily habits and enjoyable routines is the most effective path to fluency, because it ensures long-term consistency, and consistency is the true engine of acquisition.
Okay, and my position is that while consistency is undeniably valuable, the Blueprint's promise of effortless fluency, specifically through micro-habits and passive immersion, fundamentally underestimates the rigorous, deliberate practice required to truly master a language.
Let's dive right into the psychology of this then, because I look at this blueprint and I see a deeply empathetic, neurologically sound approach to human behavior.
Empathetic, sure, but is it effective?
I think so. The source material correctly identifies that burnout, not a lack of intelligence, but burnout is the #1 reason people fail to learn a language. So the text advocates for starting with an incredibly low bar, literally just 5 minutes of practice a day.
Just 5 minutes.
Just 5. And piggybacking that onto existing routines, like reviewing vocabulary while you drink your morning coffee.
The classic habit stacking approach.
Right, exactly. And it does this to bypass what chemists call activation energy. Think of activation energy like the effort it takes to push a heavy boulder up the very first few feet of a steep hill.
Okay, I'm with you.
Once it's rolling, it's fine, but that initial push is exhausting. If your goal is to study grammar for an hour, the psychological activation energy required just to open the book is massive. Most people simply won't do it after a long workday.
Sure.
So when the blueprint uses the word effortless, it doesn't mean your brain isn't processing new words. It means a lack of psychological friction. By integrating the language naturally, the learner bypasses that massive activation energy and avoids the frustration that usually causes them to just, quit entirely.
I mean, I absolutely agree that consistency beats sporadic cramming. If you have a choice between studying for 10 hours on a Sunday and doing 20 minutes every day, the science of neuroplasticity heavily favors the daily approach.
Right, because the brain paves new neural roads based on daily traffic.
Precisely. But I strongly challenge the effortless framing the text relies on, particularly this idea of a 5-minute threshold.
You don't think 5 minutes is enough to build a habit?
I think it might build a behavioral habit of starting, but it does not build a habit of learning.
Oh, interesting distinction.
Yeah. The text suggests that a 5-minute daily dip into the language is sufficient because it compounds over time. But let's look at this from a cognitive load perspective. 5 minutes is barely enough time for the adult brain to even switch context.
Wait, what do you mean by switching contexts?
Well, when you move from your native language into a target language, there is a distinct neurological transition period. Your brain operates using something called a semantic network.
Okay, and what exactly is that?
You can think of it as this massive interconnected web of lights in your brain that links a word to its meaning, its sound, and its emotional resonance.
Got it.
So, to speak English, you have to actively suppress the semantic network of your native language and boot up the English network.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. So you're saying the first 5 minutes are basically just the brain's operating system booting up the new software?
Exactly. If you only spend 5 minutes reading a short paragraph, you are spending your entire study session just warming up the engine. You are shutting down right when the semantic network is finally ready to do the heavy lifting of parsing complex grammar.
I see.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that 5 minutes a day yields massive returns. It's like saying doing one single push-up a day will turn you into an Olympic weightlifter because of compound interest. Compound interest only yields high returns if the initial deposits have real substance.
Okay, that's a really fair critique of a 5-minute isolation. But I think we have to look at how the text structures the remainder of the learner's day. The blueprint doesn't just say, do your 5 minutes and then pretend English doesn't exist.
True.
It pairs that brief, active micro-habit with a massive emphasis on passive immersion.
Ah, yes. The whole surround yourself with English philosophy.
Exactly. The blueprint advises you to basically turn your environment into an English ecosystem. It tells you to follow English creators on social media, watch YouTube videos, listen to English music while you commute.
Right, and change the default language on your phone and laptop.
Yes. And the argument here is that even if you aren't sitting at a desk, and even if you don't understand every single word, your brain is constantly absorbing patterns, intonations, and vocabulary structures. It's mimicking the way children learn languages. A toddler doesn't sit down for an hour of deliberate syntax study, right? They are just bathed in a communicative environment until the patterns implicitly lock into their brain.
I have to push back heavily on that toddler comparison because it is one of the most pervasive and, frankly, damaging myths in the adult language learning community.
Damaging? Really?
Yes, adults do not and neurologically cannot acquire language passively the way toddlers do.
But the adult brain remains plastic. We don't just lose the ability to recognize patterns the moment we turn 18.
We don't lose neuroplasticity entirely, no, but the underlying mechanism of acquisition fundamentally changes. Children benefit from a unique neurodevelopmental window called the critical period.
Right, the sponge phase.
Exactly. Their brains are literal sponges uniquely primed to absorb phonetic and syntactic rules from pure, unstructured exposure. Adults, on the other hand, have already hardwired their neural pathways for their native language.
Okay, but
An adult cannot just listen to English background noise while cooking and expect their brain to suddenly parse out complex vocabulary.
I see the distinction, but surely changing your daily environment forces interaction? Take the blueprint's advice to change your phone's language to English. You are forcing yourself to interact with target vocabulary dozens of times a day just to navigate your digital life?
Are you really, though? Let's break down what actually happens when an adult changes their phone to a foreign language. Do you read the word settings to find your settings menu?
Well, no, I suppose I look for the little gray gear icon.
Exactly. And you know the blue button means send and the red button means decline. You know that the search bar is at the top of the screen.
Yeah, that's true.
Changing your phone's language doesn't train you to comprehend English vocabulary. It trains you to rely on spatial memory and visual cues. You completely bypass the language. You aren't reading. Your thumb just knows where to go.
Wow, I genuinely hadn't thought about the spatial memory aspect.
Right? Passive listening without active, deliberate comprehension, like without stopping the podcast to figure out what a word actually means, does not lead to fluency. It just becomes white noise.
You're entirely right about the phone settings. I mean, I could navigate my phone blindfolded, so the language on the screen is practically irrelevant.
It creates an illusion of immersion, but it lacks the cognitive friction necessary to make the memory actually stick.
Okay, I'll concede the phone settings point. But I think you are selectively ignoring the second half of the blueprint's methodology by framing the text as if it only advocates for this passive white noise.
How so?
Well, the immersion is just the background environment. The blueprint explicitly pairs that environment with active production.
Like the journaling?
Yes. For example, it highly encourages keeping a daily English journal where the learner writes 3 to 5 simple sentences about their day. It also urges learners to practice speaking every single day, even if it's just describing the room out loud to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That is not white noise. That is deliberate active output. The passive immersion provides the input, and the daily journaling provides the active output.
It is active output, yes, but it is entirely unguided, uncorrected output, which brings me to perhaps my biggest point of contention with this entire source material.
Okay, let's hear it.
When the text introduces these speaking and writing habits, it explicitly tells learners, don't worry about making mistakes. The purpose is practice, not perfection.
Right.
It then doubles down on this by telling learners to only consume enjoyable content like sports or movies to avoid the feeling of a boring school subject.
Which is a brilliant strategy for sustaining motivation.
It sustains motivation, but at what cost to their actual proficiency? In linguistics, there is a highly documented phenomenon known as fossilization.
Let's define that for a second. Fossilization is when a mistake becomes permanent, right?
Essentially, yes. It happens when a learner makes a grammatical error, but because they are still understood by the listener, or in the case of this blueprint, because they are just talking out loud to themselves in an empty room, they never receive corrective feedback.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Imagine a tennis player who teaches themselves to play without a coach. They might develop a terrible, awkward backhand, but if it occasionally gets the ball over the net, they keep using it. Eventually, that terrible backhand is hardwired into their muscle memory.
And you're saying the blueprint encourages linguistic bad backhands.
Exactly. If you are writing 3 to 5 sentences in a journal every single day, and you are writing I good to the store instead of I went, and the blueprint is explicitly telling you don't worry about mistakes, what are you actually doing?
You're practicing the mistake.
You are building a very strong, highly consistent habit of speaking incorrectly. You are taking a dirt road of bad grammar and paving it into concrete. Without the rigorous grammar study that the text dismisses, you hit a hard ceiling on your fluency.
I completely understand the mechanical danger of fossilization. Hardwiring a mistake is a real risk, but we absolutely have to weigh that risk against the alternative reality of adult language learning.
Which is?
Think back to our opening scenario. The student who memorizes the textbook but freezes on the street. Why does that happen?
A lack of conversational practice.
But why do they lack practice? It's perfectionism. In cognitive psychology, there's a concept known as the affective filter.
Right.
It's this emotional variable, usually driven by anxiety, self-consciousness, and the fear of judgment, that directly interferes with the brain's ability to process or produce language. I like to think of the affective filter as a massive, intimidating bouncer standing at the door of a nightclub in your brain.
Oh, I like that. The words are inside the club, but the bouncer won't let them out.
Precisely. You know the vocabulary. The semantic network is fired up, but the moment the native speaker approaches you, your stress spikes. Cortisol floods your system, which literally impairs your prefrontal cortex's ability to retrieve memories.
The freeze response.
The bouncer shuts the door. You freeze. The blueprint understands this deeply. It recognizes that the fear of making mistakes is the primary bottleneck for adult learners.
I don't disagree that fear is a bottleneck.
So by explicitly giving the learner permission to make errors, and by grounding the practice in low-stakes, enjoyable content like movies or journaling about their cat, the text is essentially paying the bouncer. It dismantles the affective filter.
But dismantling the filter shouldn't mean dismantling the foundational standards of the language entirely. You can lower anxiety without throwing out the rulebook.
But look at the timeline the text uses. It specifically asks the reader to imagine yourself 6 months from now. 6 months of daily, confident, albeit grammatically imperfect speaking is infinitely more valuable to a beginner than 6 months of perfect, terrified silence.
Well, I agree that silence teaches nothing.
Right. You cannot correct a blank page. You cannot coach a tennis player who's too afraid to even pick up the racket. The blueprint prioritizes getting the language out of the learner's head and into the physical world.
Even if it's flawed.
Yes, there will be structural errors, but over those 6 months, they will have built the associative vocabulary and the mechanical confidence to actually communicate. Once that baseline of confident communication is established, then they can go back and refine the grammar.
That assumes they can easily refine it.
If you demand rigorous syntax study from day one, their affective filter stays sky high, and they will never even reach that 6-month milestone.
I think that is an incredibly optimistic view of how easily bad habits can be unlearned. Have you ever tried to correct a fossilized error in an adult learner?
I imagine it's tough.
It is agonizing. Unlearning an automated mistake takes exponentially more cognitive effort than learning it correctly the first time.
Even if it gets them speaking in the first place?
The problem with building a foundation entirely on low friction and enjoyment is that eventually, true fluency requires you to do things that are decidedly not enjoyable.
That's fair.
At some point, if you want to move beyond ordering a coffee, if you want to debate philosophy or negotiate a contract, or even just tell a nuanced joke in English, you have to understand complex conditional tenses. You have to understand nuanced prepositions.
Right.
You cannot acquire those high-level structures simply by watching sports highlights with subtitles or writing a 3-sentence journal entry.
I don't think the blueprint is claiming you never have to learn grammar. I think it treats it as a secondary priority to behavioral consistency.
But it frames the process as effortless, and that's where I take issue. It treats rigorous grammar study as if it's an unnecessary, boring relic of the past, rather than the vital architectural scaffolding that makes complex thought possible. You can have all the bricks of vocabulary you want, but without the scaffolding of syntax, you just have a pile of rubble. You don't have a house.
I love that scaffolding analogy, I really do. But I think the blueprint's overarching philosophy is that it doesn't matter how good your blueprints for the house are if the builder never shows up to the construction site.
Very true.
The text states, the difference between success and failure is often not intelligence or talent, it's simply consistency. I think that is a profound and empirically true statement about human learning.
We absolutely converge on the importance of consistency. There is no debate there at all.
So if we summarize our positions, my argument remains that lowering friction and finding genuine enjoyment in the process are the absolute, non-negotiable prerequisites for language acquisition. Without them, the affective filter remains too high and no amount of rigorous syntax study matters because the learner will simply quit. That makes this source's blueprint a highly effective, neurologically sound framework for getting people over the hardest hurdle, which is simply starting.
And my summary would be that while these micro habits and low friction routines are a highly practical starting point for absolute beginners, labeling them as a complete path to effortless fluency is a dangerous misnomer.
Because of the illusion of progress?
Exactly. It creates a false illusion of progress. It ignores the deliberate, cognitively demanding, and often frustrating practice required for genuine mastery. I will gladly concede your point that the fear of making mistakes severely hinders early progress and that lowering the affective filter is vital.
Right.
But we remain in substantive disagreement over whether an ecosystem of passive immersion and uncorrected 5-minute microhabits is a powerful enough engine to drive someone all the way to true fluency. Eventually, to build the house, the heavy lifting must be done.
It's a brilliant reflection on the inherent tension in literally all forms of adult learning. We are constantly trying to walk this tightrope, balancing the need to sustain long-term motivation with the unavoidable necessity of doing hard, rigorous work.
You need the motivation and the low friction just to show up, but you need the rigorous friction to actually grow once you are there.
Precisely. If the path is entirely smooth, you slide right off. You need a little gravel on the road to get any traction.
That is a perfect way to frame it. For everyone listening, it is incredibly worthwhile to look closely at your own daily routines, whether you are learning a language, picking up an instrument, or mastering a new professional skill.
Definitely.
Explore the concepts outlined in this blueprint and ask yourself, where might you need to inject more seamless, low-friction consistency into your daily habits to keep yourself in the game? And conversely, where have you been relying on passive illusions of progress, avoiding the rigorous, frustrating friction that you actually need to achieve mastery?
It's all about finding that balance.
There is always more to explore in how we design our learning environments, and no single approach holds all the answers. Thank you for joining us for this exchange of ideas. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will catch you next time on The Debate.